The old house on the hill had been empty for as long as anyone in the town could remember. It stood shrouded in overgrown ivy, its windows like dark, vacant eyes staring out over the foggy coast. They called it the Blackwood House, not just for the family who had vanished from it decades ago, but for the oppressive, inky darkness that seemed to cling to its very stones. I was a caretaker, hired by a distant relative of the Blackwoods to prepare the house for sale. My job was simple: clean it up, fix what I could, and report anything of note. My predecessor had quit after only a week, muttering about strange noises. I scoffed at his superstitions. I had faced worse in my life than an old house with creaky floorboards. The first few days were peaceful. The work was slow but steady. I spent my mornings dusting ancient furniture and my afternoons sweeping cobwebs from high ceilings. The house was a labyrinth of forgotten things, a time capsule of a family frozen in an instant. In the library, I found a collection of old journals, their leather covers cracked and brittle. They belonged to Elias Blackwood, the patriarch. I'd read them by the flickering light of a single lamp, drawn into his elegant handwriting and his poetic descriptions of the sea and the land. It was on the fourth night that I first heard it. A faint melody, like a child's music box, drifting from the second floor. It was a simple tune, a little lullaby. I smiled to myself, thinking it must be the wind playing a trick on some forgotten piece of furniture. I checked the windows, closed and locked them all. The sound stopped. The next night, the music returned. This time, it was louder, and it seemed to come from the hallway. I got up from my chair and crept out of my room. The hallway was long and lined with portraits of stern-faced Blackwoods. The moonlight, filtering through a high window, cast their faces in long, distorted shadows. The music box tune was clearer now, and I realized it wasn't a wind chime or a rattling pipe. It was a music box. The melody was sweet, but there was an underlying dissonance, a slightly off-key note that made the hair on my arms stand up. I followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall, a nursery. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was empty, save for a rocking chair that swayed gently in the darkness. There was no music box. The sound was just there. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the lullaby echoing in the silent house, before the swaying of the rocking chair came to an abrupt, violent stop. I ran back to my room, locking the door and barricading it with a heavy dresser. I tried to convince myself it was a draft, a trick of the mind. But I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day, I found a new journal in the library, one I hadn't seen before. It was Elias Blackwood's wife, Eleanor's, diary. Her entries were more personal, more frantic. She wrote of her son, Thomas, and his condition. He never cried, never spoke, and would spend hours staring at the walls. "He is not right," she wrote, her handwriting becoming a panicked scrawl. "He hears things we do not. The house whispers to him." The nights grew worse. The lullaby was replaced by a different sound, the frantic scratching I had read about in my predecessor's report. It was everywhere. In the walls, under the floorboards, in the spaces between the furniture. It sounded like 1,000 tiny claws, desperate to get out. It would start slow, a single scratch, then build into a maddening, rhythmic scraping that filled the house. I tried to work through the days, but the scratching had taken root in my mind. It followed me. I would hear it in the library, in the kitchen, even when I was standing in the open air of the backyard. My hands started to shake, and I found myself jumping at every shadow, every creak. That evening, I was in the library, trying to find some peace in the journals, when I found the last entry in Eleanor's diary. The pages were torn, the ink smeared. "He has found a way to communicate," it said. "Through the pipes, through the walls. He whispers his demands, and the house obeys. The sound is not of him. It is of the others." I slammed the book shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew then what the music box was. It was a lure. The scratching wasn't from a mouse, or a rat, or a squirrel. It was from the house itself, a monstrous, living thing, and it was scratching to get in. That night, I didn't hide. I sat in my room, a single candle my only companion, and waited. The lullaby began, softer than ever, as if it was right next to me. The scratching started, a frantic, rhythmic plea from every corner of the house. I closed my eyes and tried to block it out. But then, I heard a new sound. The sound of a doorknob slowly, gently turning. The door to my room, which I had barricaded with the dresser, began to creak open. I sat up straight, my eyes wide with terror, and watched as a dark, slender shape squeezed through the small opening. It wasn't human. It was long, pale, and moved with a jerky, unnatural motion. It paused in the sliver of space and looked at me, its head cocked to one side. Then, from the darkness of the hall, a whisper. "You've been listening to our song," the voice said. "Now, you have to sing along." The shape slipped fully into the room, its head swiveling to face me with a sickening click. It was tall and unnervingly thin, its limbs long and jointed at impossible angles. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a pale, translucent white, crisscrossed with a faint network of dark veins. It had no eyes, only two hollow, gaping sockets that seemed to drink the light from the candle. From the open door behind it, the whispers of sing-along multiplied, a chorus of ghostly voices echoing down the dark hallway. It raised a hand, its fingers impossibly long and tipped with sharp, black nails. The motion was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly gentle. It didn't lunge or attack. It simply pointed to my throat. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice was a useless, broken thing trapped in my chest. The creature took a step, its foot making no sound on the floorboards. It was the movement of a shadow, a thing that shouldn't be solid. As it approached, the air in the room grew cold, thick with the smell of dust and damp earth. I backed away until my spine hit the wall, the rough plaster digging into my back. "Sing," the whispers hissed from the hall. "Sing our song." I could feel a new sensation rising within me, not from my fear, but from the creature's presence. It was a cold pressure in my lungs, a burning need to produce a sound. I tried to force out a word, any word, but all that came out was a low, mournful hum. It was the lullaby from the music box, the same one that had haunted the house for nights. The tune flowed from my lips on its own, a song of sorrow and endless night. The creature lowered its hand. It tilted its head, its empty sockets seeming to watch me, listen to the forced melody I was singing. The whispers from the hall quieted, replaced by the soft, rhythmic scratching I had heard in the walls. I realized, in a flash of bone-deep terror, that the scratching was not a sound of distress, but a sound of pleasure. It was the sound of the house listening, of the thing inside of it being fed. My body began to feel heavy, my limbs growing numb. The song wouldn't stop. It just kept coming, rising and falling in an endless, horrifying loop. I watched as the creature reached out, its hand hovering just inches from my face. I could feel the cold radiating from it, the final, consuming emptiness. The last thing I saw was its mouth, a lipless, stitched-together seam on its face, parting just enough for me to hear a new sound. It wasn't a whisper. It was a dry, hollow laugh. The last thing I remember was the laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement, but a dry, rattling thing, like bone scraping on stone. Then, the cold reached me. Not the cold of a draft, but a final, absolute emptiness that didn't just chill my skin. It silenced everything inside me. The song stopped. My consciousness, and everything that made me, simply winked out. Days later, the landlord, a man named Mr. Finch, grew concerned. My phone hadn't been answered, and the last check I'd cashed was over a week ago. He drove out to the old Blackwood house, the same one he had so flippantly called haunted. The front door was unlocked. A faint, dusty smell hung in the air, but the house was silent. He walked through the library, past the endless portraits, and found my room. The heavy dresser was still pushed against the door, just as I had left it. But the door itself was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible between the frame and the wood. Puzzled, he pushed the dresser aside and stepped into the room. A single, half-melted candle sat on the floor, its wick burned down to a nub. He saw the hammer I had used and the small, jagged hole in the wall. He knelt down, peering into the dark space. He saw nothing but old wiring and insulation. Just as he was about to stand, a faint sound reached his ears. It wasn't the frantic scratching or the rhythmic tapping, but a simple melody. A lullaby, soft and sweet, but with a terrible, off-key note that made his stomach turn. He listened, his head cocked to the side, trying to place the sound. It wasn't coming from the walls or the floor. It was coming from the dresser. He moved the heavy piece of furniture back to the door and knelt down, his ear pressed against the dark wood. The music was coming from inside. He stood up, his heart pounding, and turned to look at the small hole I had made in the wall. The hole was no longer just a hole. Inside, a pair of hollow, gaping sockets stared back at him from the darkness, and a dry, hollow laugh filled the silent house.